And we will now move on to our next speaker, who is from the EdTech world. His vision is to come up with next generation of education software solutions. He understands how what data can do to support school and student performance. He understands the potential of data. He helps, governments to understand the potential of data and what we should be asking from our suppliers. His name is Nick Finnemore, and he's the director of Finnemore Consulting, speaking about education behind the tech curve. Nick, over to you.
Excellent, thank you. It's an honor to present to everybody, so thank you very much. Very similar to Professor Manuel. I'm in England, in the UK at the moment. It is quite early, but it's also freezing, so I prefer to be over in Oman, if I'm being honest. I think it's probably a lot warmer than what it is here. So I'm jealous for sure. Let me just bring up my slides.
We have strong AC in this hotel, so it's also very cold in here, Nick.
Do you know, I was in Dubai only a few weeks ago, and I have to say the aircon is very, very, it's great. It's fantastic. But yeah, absolutely brilliant. Again, a big thank you. I'm Nick Finnemore. I've worked in the EdTech world for about 20 odd years, so very much in schools, but I have worked in higher education, further education, worked with some big companies. The biggest company, in fact, in the UK, which was Sims at one point, which had about 84% of the marketplace. I've also worked in startups, and I've worked for mid-range sort of EdTech sort of businesses as well. I worked in Saudi, so I've done some work with the Saudi government. I've also worked in places like America as well. So I've sort of got quite a broad view on education and technology. It's something I'm quite passionate about. And today I want to sort of talk to you about, and it's actually more of a plea really, as much as anything else. So it's a plea with the universities, because I appreciate and some of the things that we've been doing, like with the judging and stuff, shows that universities like Marjan University, really forward thinking, regarding Internet of Things. So I want really a bit of a plea with those EdTech companies that are out there, but also with education, higher education, about how to support the sort of up to K-12 education as much as anything else. And the main reason why is ultimately, if you look around the world, and every industry around the world is really trying to take on board new technology all the time. And technology, when we talk about taking on new technology, it's not because they have time, because technology is now coming at us at much faster rates. We don't have this opportunity anymore to sort of go, let's test this, let's find out what we can do with technology. We're much more in this position of going, actually, this technology is happening quicker and quicker. And actually what we need to do is adapt to it much quicker as well. And actually, when you look at education, when it comes up to the K-12, then ultimately, it is far behind. We still teach, really in classrooms in lots of cases. Don't get me wrong, the pandemic changed that in quite a big way. About 90 in the UK, not 84% of teachers were still sending homework and assignments home by email before the pandemic. And once the pandemic was over, that had reversed. So it's not the case that we can't adapt either, and it's not a case that teachers can't adapt. They really can adapt when there is a strong need. And what we need to do is work very closely between industry, universities, and education and lower education to basically get to that point of understanding, making sure they understand what technology can do and how we can meet their particular needs within schools. It's also important from the perspective of children that we are developing, the future. These are the children that we should be making into these rounded adults to basically progress and basically drive this world forward. All the challenges that you can think of regarding climate change, they're going to be solved really by the educators of the now, not by us necessarily. So we need basically them to be curious. We need them to understand what is achievable and what's not achievable, and basically be able to adapt really, really quickly. So ultimately, again, as I said, technology is moving at a faster rate. Regarding the World Economic Forum, in 2025, a third of the jobs will be technology jobs that we don't even understand exist now. Okay, that's how quick technology is moving forward and how quick we need to adapt and be very, very curious. If you look at the car industry, that does adapt really quickly. They're already using robots. That's been done for a long time. They're adapting those robots to be more efficient. We're also looking at automation in as far as cars are concerned and lorries. And as one of the presentations already said, there's lots of jobs which won't be there in the future. So if you think that lorries are going to be automated, there will be no more lorry drivers. And there's a benefit to all of us, and that is that the transport will go 24/7. You won't need those sort of taxometers where people in lorries have to wait for a while or sleep. You don't have to wait for humans. So, and this is coming at us at a faster and faster rate. So we, again, the children need to adapt. We need to adapt to the new technologies. We need to make sure we're upskilling everybody. Actually, we all need to be part of that change, because it's some of it is about culture and behavior. And we need to, show the pupils of or the adults of the future, as they are, how to be more curious and how to adapt and change to new technology as quickly as you possibly can, which means that we need to change the way that we teach. We need to change the environments that we teach in, because we also need to take in the latest technology to support these young adults or young children. One of our jobs as part of educators, when we're educators, what we should be doing is showing children the art of the possible. What can be achieved. And if we're basically still teaching them in an old-fashioned way, how can they really understand when we say, look at the art of the possible, open your mind, open your window, when they're sort of going, well, you're still teaching me in the same way as we've always been taught. I appreciate education is adapting, but at a much slower rate than basically other industries. For EdTech companies and businesses, and that includes universities, you have to adapt to the new trends that are coming down the road. It's very, if you look at some businesses like, you've got Hoover, you've got Kodak, some big companies, Blockbuster, massive companies. They're all big companies, but what they weren't willing to do was to disrupt their own markets because of these new trends that were coming towards them. They knew about them, but Blockbuster, Netflix talked to them, Hoover, Dyson talked to them. So they knew that some of these new technologies are coming, but they weren't willing to react. And now they've become the companies that you don't really hear much of. Hoover at one point was the name for a vacuum cleaner. People would use it as a synonym for a vacuum cleaner, but it's not there anymore. Dyson is what's basically much more prolific in the world. But there are companies that we can learn from. So the Amazons of the world, what an amazing company. They literally look at new technology all the time and work out how they can use it to benefit their customers. What do they need to do to basically make sure they reduce as much friction for the customer as possible? The ability to walk into a shop, as you can do with Amazon, pick up a sandwich, walk out, and not even go to a till. Amazing. The ability, at one point they were looking at drones to drop down packages. So again, to reduce the amount of waiting time for delivery drivers and so on. Great idea, not really taken off quite so well at the moment. But basically, again, a really good idea. Always forward thinking, always looking at the latest technology and working out how it can support their business and their customers. And a lot of this is about looking at your customers and understanding their particular needs, and which means you have to work really closely with your customer base all the time. And our customer base is children. Okay, in the EdTech world, a lot of it is children or young adults. So we need to understand what their needs are and actually how we can take the latest technology to meet their particular needs. Now, Stephen Heffel here, so he's a professor in Bristol University. In the past, we had the chance to work out if technology could do what we wanted, but today technology can do anything. We just need to decide what we want it to do, which means we need our children to be really imaginative. We need them to be curious about new technology and what's coming down the road, looking forward and seeing what new technology might be. Because all the technology we talk about, probably in this conference and in a day-to-day basis, is technology that's here. What about the technology that's coming in the future? There's, like I say, there is lots of different areas of business and higher education which do take it on board. I'm not saying that all of us aren't thinking about it. I appreciate there is some really strong sort of people being curious about the future of technology and what it can actually achieve. But we need to do this for our students. We need them to understand that they should be looking forward, because we don't have the time with regarding the latest technology. So Ken Robinson, who unfortunately died last year, was talking about curiosity as the engine of achievement, and I fully agree with him. Ultimately, we need to be, far more curious than we've ever been, as far as, in our own industries, and some industries are very strong at that, but also within education, and getting children to be, looking ahead. In some cases, they're further ahead than we are already. My nephew, who's only, 4, he already starts using Fortnite, which is effectively the metaverse. And the metaverse is going to become bigger and bigger. Ultimately, we're all going to be involved in the metaverse at some point very, very soon. We've got Fortnite, we've got Roblox. They're already starting. But you'll start buying in those worlds, you start buying your NFTs. You'll start buying, even shopping for potentially groceries. That then comes to your door. You'll start immersing yourself more and more into this metaverse of cryptocurrency, NFTs, everything else. And it's coming, I assure you, it is definitely coming. If you can imagine, so I'm going to ask you just to almost close your eyes at this point, but imagine a situation where as a teacher or as a professor, you basically wake up in the morning, you stretch out, you've had a really good night's sleep because the bed has been climate controlled for your particular body. When you wake up, there is an app already telling you how well you slept, which you already do probably in some ways with a watch. It basically says, what length of time you've slept. It's going to change the climate within your room to adapt to the amount of sleep you've had and the way that your body has basically taken on board the way you slept. You then go to the toilet. It also gives you an element of, it tells you what any deficiencies in things like magnesium or potassium or anything else. You step into the shower. It's really perfectly timed for you and right temperature for you as a person, because it knows who you are as soon as you step into the actual shower itself. If excuse my voice, I apologize. You then go downstairs and already there's some suggestions on the meals you could have based on those deficiencies that you might have had. Okay. So as you go through, this is more and more about the Internet of Things and how the world around you is going to basically adapt and tell you, and give you advice. It's supporting you. It's not telling you what to do, but it's supporting you. The car is already outside. You step into the back. There is no driver because it's automated. You start asking questions. You start saying, well, which is my class today? What are they doing? It is, I've decided to come in today because actually normally we do online, which is fine because it's more blended learning. But actually, regarding the last test, what were the results? The feedback you get from the system is saying, yeah, basically these are the results. By the way, based on this result on this child, ultimately, I think we need to be a little bit aware. There might be things that are going on personally, because at the moment, their grades are starting to drop and we need to do something about it. Okay, what are the proposed interventions that we could do? Here's 3 proposed interventions based on historical information and based on what's happening in other universities with other pupils, potentially with the same demographic. Okay, so basically, the actual, all these universities and education systems are connected. You get to a point as a child, you get streamed quite easily at any point in time when you feel ready. Where it basically says you're really good at these 3 things. It tells the university that potentially you want to keep an eye on this child because this child is meeting your criteria as a sort of child that you would like in your university. So you're already starting the admissions process early. All these things are here now. The idea that you can basically ask for a presentation, it's just that they're not together. Okay, the idea that you can buy a toilet if you want to. It costs a lot of money to basically work out what deficiency you have. The automation of cars, they're already testing them. We have them in Milton Keynes, we have them tested already on our roads, and they are already in San Francisco as well. So these things are here, they're not new technologies. Quantum computing is around the corner. All these things are almost here or are here now. They're not the new technologies, the new technologies are things behind that. Okay.
Hi, Nick. You have 5 more minutes. If you could wrap up the presentation within 5 minutes, please.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you.
Now, there are companies out there already that do use the latest technologies. You've got people like Lexplore, which is a Swedish company, amazing. Ultimately with young children, what they do is they monitor the eye movement, understand where the child is basically having a problem, and then report and offer some interventions. So you start to understand where children have reading difficulties, because young children normally try and hide any sort of ability problem potentially, and they will either take their books home and try and read them through, and it's taking them a longer time. But actually, with Lexplore, it's a way of identifying those issues. Robotics, SoftBank create robotics for many different industries, but are also looking at it as a way of feeding these in as potential teaching assistants within schools. Again, trying to work out the latest technology and how that can support education. And with these robots, there's obviously, potentially children would interact with them more because they're robots, they're not adults. But we need to think about all the other things, all the other problems, or other concerns that there is in education, and think about these things differently. How can we solve these particular problems? Things from identifying children at risk, those children who ultimately, if you looked at the data and looked at the demographics, can actually work out where children potentially become unemployed or not consistent or persisting through education. And what do you need to do about that as early as possible? Because the longer you leave these things to happen, the worse they get. But the thing is, without data and machine learning can look at these sort of trends in different demographics, in different sort of geographics as well, and then work out how to basically a trend and identify these children. Emissions, the idea, as I said already, to actually already understand based on a number of data points where a child is best placed, what school is best for them, what university will be best for them in the future, where potentially would the best employment be. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's only one track for these children and basically they can't change and choose, but it's all about, again, data basically helping and supporting choice. The immersive education, it's already starting. People are already using virtual reality goggles as a way of teaching about ancient Egypt. But think about how you could adapt it and use it more. What about the idea of going through potentially difficult situations, like maybe going into sort of Syrian sort of refugee camps and walking through and really understanding what it's like? That's really important. It's about using immersive technology for greater than just sort of understanding dinosaurs and things like Egypt and so on. There's also an element about technology, and that's about reducing friction. So how can you make it easier for users and people to get from A to B as quickly as possible, to get to that value? From the point of purchasing software or even data analytics sort of software to the point where ultimately you get to the value where you understand and can use it straight away. And things like Alexa, the ability to ask questions and ask for reports rather than basically trying to search for them yourself, is a much better place to be. So how would you use technology to solve these other challenging things? Things like unconscious bias. There are some education companies starting to look at that. Things like I've forgotten the other ones I had, but unconscious bias and other sort of tools, other sort of problems that still are concerning within education, like blended learning. What else can we do? And what else can we use to improve on our blended learning. Because ultimately, again, there's not just one learning style. It's all about getting to the point of having individualized learning. So how do you make sure that when that child has to go to hospital lots, how do they maintain their education? And actually blended learning is a good approach to doing so. So all I would like, and again, like I said at the very beginning, it's almost like a plea really, is ultimately in education, we need to be more curious. We need to understand what technology can do. We need universities, edtech companies, and schools to come together. They can all learn from each other. EdTech companies need to understand the needs of the education market. The educators need to understand what technology can do. And both coming together can basically bring that together and basically for a much better future. But also, I think it's a way, as behavior breeds behavior, it's a way for our educators, our learners, to basically look at us as adults and understand how to be more curious, how to look for the art of the possible, be more imaginative, and basically make sure it's always based on getting the best return and the best education possible. If you're interested in joining that conversation, we talk about it a lot. We have lots of groups on LinkedIn and so on. So please do, get involved, and it'd be really good to see some of your thoughts and ideas, and being curious and how imaginative you all are. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. You talked about the technologies which we don't know will be coming in the future, and it's good to have kind of a basket, a range of up-to-date skills, which when things do change, at least we can keep ourselves useful, or try to keep ourselves useful as much as possible to keep upskilled. Earlier we were talking about when is the future. I think it's also maybe something I was thinking about is where is the future, because the future is kind of in different geographic locations or different industries. Some industries are ahead, some locations are ahead, even within the same country. And it just made me think of things which are kind of even through regulation are now, for example, in Oman recently, I saw that the government had listed some services where only where you can't make cash payments anymore. It's all digital payments, and this kind of thing will happen in many ways. Kind of we'll be told by regulators that certain ways of working will no longer be required. So there's always having to keep up to date. And it also made me think today when I was on the way to the conference, I was late, and I was on the expressway and the motorway, and I came to a petrol station, and I was low on fuel. And when I got there, the guy told me that I had to pay by cash, and I never have cash on me. Who here has cash on them, by the way? Who does? Yes. Wash your hands. Cash is very dangerous. I got lost now. I'm not sure what I was about to say. So maybe I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Nabila Al-Makki. Ask me or Nick? Yeah, sure.
Hey, Professor, how are you? And please come over. We have it's very freezing here, by the way. My question. My question to you that you mentioned in one of your slides that you use machine learning to identify student at risk. My question is that I wonder, like, if you could tell me whether you use supervised or unsupervised learning, which is like either predictive or like more like in clustering based, and which clustering or machine learning algorithm do you use for that, and what is the accuracy that you have obtained in identifying student at risk? Thank you.
So in relation to students at risk and using machine learning, then actually, you can be really, the percentage of accuracy can be quite strong. Obviously, you need to have a reasonable sized data pool, and places like, like in the UK, the DFE are trying to create a data pool of all educators. And I think it's the same with, with other countries. I think that, the more data you have, the more accurate you'll become, because you've obviously got more information, more historical information to basically lean on. However, there are so many data points that are collected about a pupil. Everything from their journey to home and from school, to school and back again. the sort of lateness of a child. And one example of this was where a school basically were finding that this child was ultimately, really bright on a number of different subjects, but really poor on maths. And basically, when the actual data was then processed, they sort of understood that actually maths always happened on this Tuesday, and it always, was always the first lesson of the year, of the day. And when they spoke to the child, because again, data doesn't necessarily tell you all the information. Sometimes it just points you in the right direction. But they identified that ultimately the reason behind it was because the child was basically dropping his siblings off first at the bus stop and then was late for his own bus. And then ultimately they bought him a bike and he basically got to school at the right time. So again, it improved on this child whose parents weren't necessarily around. And so he was basically acting as the parent in the mornings. There are other situations where they've identified where, the Christmas jumper, because we're coming to Christmas, the Christmas jumper basically is a really Christmas jumper day where basically children pay £1, they can wear any jumper they like. But again, they've identified that's actually a bad thing because children who can't afford that £1, basically, again, then they end up not wanting to come in, so you get poor attendance. And also children who want to be cool don't come in either because they don't want to be wearing a Christmas jumper. But again, data can keep on basically identifying these trends that are happening. And again, it's the same with children at risk. Once you look at all the data on behavior, you look at data on attendance, you look at data in relation to, how late they might be sometimes when they are coming in, and things like their achievements, you can start, and other data points as well. There's many other data points. You can get quite an accurate picture around that child and basically what whereabouts they are at the moment. One of the things I would like to see is where the data is connected everywhere, where, people in, maybe you're in a town in Liverpool, but actually in London, which has the same demographic, the same geography, ultimately you get the same information around interventions as you would in either of those. So you're learning from each of the different schools and you're learning from different universities. So rather than us all holding onto our own data and sort of trying to analyze it ourselves, you can ultimately analyze it as a group instead.
Thank you, Nick. We'll need to move on to our next speaker now.
Sorry, did it help? Did it answer your question though?
He looks happy, so I think you answered his question. Something I was mentioning before, which I kind of forgot when I asked the question. There's a supermarket here in Oman, and I saw that they had installed the self-checkout kind of system, and they were training up the staff how to fix it when things go wrong and all of that. But now, like you mentioned, many supermarkets don't have any checkout. You just take the item and you walk out. So I feel they wasted a few months of their time training them up for this system, whereas now we don't need that training anymore. So I think that's like an example of outdated, kind of behind the curve that you were talking about.